We often hear Jehovah's Witnesses quote Colossians 1:15 that Jesus is the firstborn of all creation, and they interpret this in a literal sense that Jesus was the very first creation. Now, although firstborn at times, depending on the context, does refer to one who was literally born first, i.e. the eldest, however, throughout the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, the term firstborn, especially in Jewish culture, also indicates preeminence and first in rank. As I mentioned to the JW elder, David was the youngest, but God in Psalm 89 verse 27 said, I will make him, this is speaking of David, my firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth. Now, David obviously was not the literal firstborn king, but the highest in rank of the kings of the earth. God's chosen people, Israel, is another example where God says that Israel is my firstborn son. Now, obviously, Israel was not literally the first nation or first people that was born. There were other nations around before Israel, but God chose Israel to be the privileged, the blessing, and the preeminent nation above all other peoples. Manasseh was the eldest son Joseph had, but in Jeremiah 31 verse 9, God says that Ephraim is my firstborn. So going based off this concept, and we see this quite consistently in scripture, we see that the term firstborn, whether in the Hebrew or in the Greek, is not always a literal firstborn birth, but it also has a figurative meaning. Now, I just want to go back to Colossians 1 verse 15 and read it in context and see what else it says about Christ. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Now, just look at the word firstborn. It doesn't say first created. Born and created are two different things. I was once born. If we're going to take the word literally, like JWs take the word firstborn literally, then Jesus could not have been the firstborn of all creation because he wasn't literally the first person born. Technically, Adam's first son, Cain, is the firstborn of creation. Adam himself wasn't even the firstborn. Adam was created just like the angels were created. Now, Jesus was born as a baby 2,000 years ago, but that's not the argument Jehovah's Witnesses make. They say that Jesus was the first created being. If they're going to use this verse to make any argument that Jesus was the very first creation, well, that's not even what firstborn in a literal sense means. In a literal sense, Mary's firstborn son was Jesus. So in that sense, that makes sense. But let's keep reading. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. Now, when you check the New World Translation, the Watchtower's perverted version, you'll notice that they've added the word other in verses 16 and 17, when no Greek manuscript has the word other. Even in their Greek interlinear translation, there isn't the word other found in those verses. But they've purposefully and deceitfully inserted this in the English to make Christ seem to be created. Yes, they say Jesus created all things, but it was all other things because he himself, apparently, according to them, was created. Verse 18, and he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. Again, Jesus wasn't literally the firstborn from the dead because Lazarus, for example, came back to life first after he was dead, before Jesus resurrected from the dead. But the difference is Christ is firstborn from the dead in a preeminent sense because his resurrection from the dead is an eternal and permanent resurrection, a preeminent resurrection. Lazarus died again a second time, but Jesus is alive forevermore. Christ is the first one to resurrect and never die again, that in all things he may have the preeminence.